It's been fascinating over the last day or so watching Gamergate spring back into life like a dried up seed being hit by a raindrop and unfurling into a new plant. And all of this is happening for good reason. A dev who happened to have their game shown at E3, supported Gamergate back in the day, said nothing controversial, supported it for all the right reasons, and then got called out because apparently someone searched back through his Twitter history 3 years to find something to damn him with. It kind of illustrates exactly why Gamergate is a thing. You know, people trying to turn wrongthink into a blacklist for the industry, openly professing these kinds of things, and lo and behold, that pisses people off and gets them to rise up again. Why anyone's shocked, I don't know. But what this means is there's a lot of attention back on Gamergate again, and a lot of people who don't really know what it's about or only know the existing media narrative. And this is exactly why I set out to write my book, though looking at Zoe Quinn's sales numbers, pre-order numbers, maybe I shouldn't have been so worried, because they're pretty pathetic. I do better than that with a lot of my game products. So maybe it's worth just going over in hopes of reaching a few noobs, a few people that have only ever seen the media narrative. Maybe it's worth going over some stuff to try and reach at least one of them, perhaps. I'm writing a book on this. I'm writing the history on this, or a history on this. I was involved in Gamergate since before it was Gamergate. I used to support Zoe Quinn. As a depression sufferer, Depression Quest wasn't perfect, but it was something that I could point people towards, So I used to be very much a booster of the opposite side in all this, if you want to call it that. But I understand Gamergate. I have a longer history of understanding controversies and moral panics and so on, being involved in them when it comes to nerd media. And that's probably the first thing that you really need to understand about Gamergate. It is not an isolated incident. As far back as you care to go, there have been moral panics and attacks on nerd culture. You've got Frederick Wertham comics, you've got Pat Pulling and D&D, you've got Tipper Gore and the PMRC, you've got Jack Thompson in video games previously when they were murder simulators rather than misogyny trainers, So you've got to understand that Gamergate takes place against a backdrop of a siege mentality in nerds that is pretty much entirely justified. And in several of the years leading up to Gamergate, this new moral panic, this sexism moral panic, was the one that was erupting. And you had a lot of indie developers, you had a lot of journalists and so on really heavily pushing this, and gamers getting more and more resentful. You also have the background that a lot of games media was corrupt and known to be corrupt. There was a lot of payola going on. But this was the status quo. People understood it, people knew it, they didn't necessarily accept it, but they made fun of it, and it was part of the culture. But you had these indie devs and these activist media types kind of lording it over everyone, being holier than thou. So you've got all this going on. You've got a history of moral panics, you've got a new moral panic, you've got people lording it over you, and basically slagging off the things that you love and telling you that they're wrong and bad and problematic. And then, into that seething atmosphere, you drop a bombshell. And the bombshell happened to be Zoe Quinn fucking a lot of people who were good for her career. To start with, this was just a kind of piss-taking. Here's someone who slept around with a bunch of people behind her boyfriend's back. Ha ha ha, isn't he pathetic? Ha ha ha. Isn't she pathetic? That was pretty much the extent of it. But then, as it began to become clear that some of the people she was sleeping with were boosting her career, and at least one of them was a games journalist, and he hadn't disclosed this relationship, and he'd given her a lot of boosting, that's when it started to transition into being Gamergate. You've basically got 3 transitions. You got Five Guys, which was making fun of the sex scandal, Conspiracy, which was pointing out that she was getting boosts and help from this guy, and then that segues into Gamergate when it became apparent that the corruption and nepotism was far broader. So Quinn was really only the spark at the start from which everything else occurred, and that is the extent to which she should have ever been relevant. Now, as this corruption and nepotism became exposed, that's when gamers became incensed. Here were people who had been lecturing your industry, lecturing games on how bad and wrong they were, and here they were engaged in unethical, nepotistic practices. That is what pissed people off, that is what engaged people, but even so, Gamergate didn't really take off until a combination of two things happened. The advent of the Gamergate tag, which was tweeted out by Adam Baldwin, which brought a lot of attention and so on to it, and the Gamers Are Dead articles. Secondary to all those things was the mass censorship that was going on, even on otherwise free speech platforms like 4chan, and the Streisand effect is very much a thing. People figured if this was being censored, then there must be something to it, and so it just took off everywhere else you cared to look. But the real thing that really kicked it off was the Gamers Are Dead articles. These were meant to be some sort of repudiation of the gamer identity, but in that context, in that period, at the height of this moral panic that was going on, it was exactly the wrong step to take. It really pissed people off and made the whole thing take off, especially since these articles appeared mostly over the span of 2 days. Well, one latecomer was on the 4th day, I think, but this was virtually a dozen articles, those are the main ones anyway, slagging off gamers, and they all said pretty much the same thing, and it was obvious that there was something going on, but people were dismissed as paranoid, as conspiracy theorists. To start with, they thought it was to do with Silverstring Media, which is this bonkers ideological PR company that does stuff to do with indie games. But then the existence of Game Journo Pros was leaked, along with a bunch of emails from it, and so it turned out that there were a bunch of games journalists and others engaged on this list, seeking to craft this narrative, seeking to promote censorship of the discussion on these topics of corruption and so on. It doesn't require a conspiracy theory. This wasn't really a conspiracy theory, it's just people working together to push an agenda that they happen to believe in. But that's unethical, that's wrong, and that revelation further exposed a huge bunch of other journalists, and then people got to digging, and they found a lot of this stuff going on. The outrage was justified, but Gamergate was always up against a problem. They didn't have a loudhailer, a megaphone, they didn't have any of that. They only had social media, YouTube, alternative media, things like that. All the main game outlets were the people being accused of corruption, so little wonder, again, no real conspiracy required, that they would seek to defend themselves and to create this false narrative of Gamergate as a misogynist harassment campaign. It was never true, but that's what they created, and that's what stuck, and that's another reason I'm writing this book, to try and repudiate that. But as Gamergate comes into the spotlight again, I think the context is different. The insanity on college campuses has made more people aware of just how bonkers the ideologies that Gamergate's up against are. People don't trust the media anymore. That's changed over the last couple of years. So I don't think they're going to have as easy a ride dismissing Gamergate. Furthermore, the Women in Action Media Report exonerated Gamergate. The Newsweek survey, properly read, exonerated Gamergate. The FBI exonerated Gamergate. There's no juice to this harassment narrative. And the other thing that's changed since is that we've had Black Lives Matter, a big, leaderless, amorphous movement, a hashtag that anyone can tweet to. And the media seems to understand that when someone loosely affiliated with Black Lives Matter assassinates cops, or when a whole bunch of them march through the street chanting for the death of cops, they're not representative of Black Lives Matter as a whole, or its guiding philosophy, or its focus, or anything like that. Yet that same understanding is not extended to a group like Gamergate. So it's back for the same reasons. People are lying, people are blacklisting, people are acting unethically. So little wonder that Gamergate would spring back up in this instance. All I can suggest you do if you're new to this, or if you've only heard the bad things, is to Genuinely go and do some research. Check what you've been told. It's not correct. Gamergate was always left-wing in the majority, not right-wing. It was concerned with ethics and censorship and other attendant issues to that. It was never about harassment. Ask yourself, should a woman who acts poorly, unethically, should they be immune to criticism just because they're a woman? Does that strike you as a particularly feminist position to hold, that women should be immune to criticism? I don't think so. I think equality means being treated the same, no matter who you are. If you fuck up, you should be brought up on it. You know, and look into the harassment that came the other way. Look into the con leaks and the Zack attack. You know, no real harassment was ever successfully linked to Gamergate, but it has been successfully linked to the people on the other side. You know, keep an open mind, go and look. I'm not going to point you in the direction of this stuff, because this is good training for you to learn how to investigate and countermand fake news, you know? Go looking with an open mind. Look away from the sources you normally look at. Look at the opposite side. Weigh and measure and see who is found wanting. Zang.
When I was just a baby.